Welcome to the next session of project number 2, sorting this list. Now during this section, we're going to take a look at prompting the user for some input. This input that we get from the user is going to tell our application or our macro how it should sort the list. Whether we want to sort it by division, category, or by total sales. Those three macros that we saw in the previous lecture. Now this is how we're going to do it. I've opened up the Visual Basic Editor. I did this in the prior session. Now I'm going to create a new procedure or a new macro, but we're going to write this one by hand rather than recording it like we did back inside of Project 1. So take a look. This is what we're going to do. So I'm inside the Visual Basic Editor. I'm going to go up to my Insert menu, top of my screen, and I'm going to create a new procedure. Now, a procedure is really just a really fancy name for macro. It's just how we refer to macros within our code. We call them procedures. So I'll go Insert Procedure. It's going to ask me a little bit of information about the procedure that I want to create. So my first step is I'll give it a name. All the same rules that we talked about with macro names earlier apply here as well. So I'm going to call this sort list. Remember all those rules that we had to adhere to? No spaces, 255 characters, no special characters. You can use numbers in there, but can't start the procedure or macro name with the number. Remember all that stuff? All still applies here within procedure names. Exactly the same. Now the rest of the information I'm going to leave set to default. We're going to create a sub procedure, and it's going to be public in scope. I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. And this is going to create a little placeholder that I can use for my new procedure. Let's just position that on the screen so we can see it a little bit better here. There we go. Now in between the public subline and in sub is where all of our code is going to go. Now the first segment of code that we're going to build here is going to be about prompting the user, asking the user how do they want to sort the list. Now anytime that I get information from the user, I want to store that input, the user input, inside of what's called a variable. And a variable is really just a storage location in code that we can make reference to that stored information, that user input. So really my first step here is going to be to declare or create a variable. And I'm going to call this variable user input. And I get to tell Excel what type of data I'm going to store inside this variable. In our case, it's going to be a string or text. And now my next step is I'm going to tell it what we're going to store inside of this variable called input box. And what we're going to be storing inside of this variable, is actually called user input, is an input box, or the results of an input box. And an input box is really just a prompt that's going to come up on the screen for our users and ask them for some information. In my case, I'm going to prompt them for one of three values. I'm going to say a 1 equals sort by division. A 2 will equal sort by category. And a 3 will equal sort by total sales. So we're going to have this simple little prompt that comes up and prompts the user for a 1, 2, or 3. And that's it. I need to gather information from my users. I'll present them with an input box. Get that information from them and then store it inside of this variable, in our case called user input. Prompting them for that information, gathering it, storing it, and then have the ability to then retrieve that information when we need it. So let's take a look at what we got here so far. I'm going to go ahead and pull my window just off to the side so I can see into my Excel document in the background. And my cursor is currently inside of my procedure or macro called sort list. Up at the top of my screen, I've got a play button. This is going to allow me to run the active procedure, the one that my cursor is inside of. So I'll hit that button. This runs my procedure, and there's my prompt. This is my input box. And you can see my simple little message there. 1 equals sort by division, 2 equals sort by category, and so on. Ooh, I misspelled that. The user then types something in there, like I'll type in number 2. When they hit OK, that value, the number 2 there, is now stored inside of this this variable here called UserInput. And now we can use that inside of our code to direct the rest of the actions that should be taking place here. So we've created a simple little variable or a simple procedure with a simple variable in there, getting information from our users. In the next session, we're going to take a look at building logic that we can now direct our macro or procedure to do different things based on that user input.